have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by Grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Sponsored by the Zero Aggression Project, zeroaggressionproject.org. Zap the state and have a nice day. I love that.
Thank you.
Hey, Kennedy Martin Luther King, I understand, documents were dropped yesterday. Not all 80,000 of them, whatever that number means, but would you say 63,000 so far?
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. I just want to be clear. I don't know much about the MLK stuff, but there were some documents. There were MLK documents in the mix last night. In fact, I counted just in my little bit of reading, I got 3 of them that were related to the MLK assassination. So it wasn't all Kennedy stuff. That number that was given by Trump was way higher than any of the experts were initially expecting. When that number got announced Tuesday, everybody was like turning to each other going, where did he get that number?
Yeah, where are those other documents?
Yeah, that was interesting. So we're going to get into how that all works. And
by the way, we should say, neither Jim nor I have read all of these. You know, it's been less than 24 hours here. There are teams of people being paid, $1 an hour to read all this stuff and report what's coming back.
There's AI that's being used on this, and there are people who this is what they've done their whole life is read documents like this. Will explain their role because they have something specifically they know how to do that the rest of us don't. I want to explain that. So this is the too long didn't read version of this. I just literally was talking to a friend just moments ago who was urging me not to do this show because we don't know enough yet. And that's been my whole career. I've been super careful about making sure that every single detail was nailed down and that everything I'm telling you is 100% verified and correct, and I've got the source. And it has stopped a lot of shows from being made where I had a very high epistemic level of confidence. And screw that, I'm not doing that today.
Well, you're in this. I mean, you're a player in this thing, Jim, and we need to know what you're thinking.
Well, not really, but I know why you're saying that. But I do feel some sense of obligation because of what I do know. How about that? We'll just put it there. Okay.
That's a good way of saying it. Yeah.
I'm not a researcher and I'm not even really a popularizer. We've done a couple of episodes on this. And yes, I've invested a lot of time into this story over the last year and a half now. And a significant even expense and expenditure trying to figure out the truth of this story.
Well, let's get into it. What is it that you need to say this morning?
Well, I want to say first, I want to put a qualification on. You can establish some epistemic confidence in something. You could say, I know a certain amount about what I'm about to share with you. Nobody knows much of anything because we were told there were 80,000 pages that were going to be released. There were 2 data dumps that happened yesterday. First one happened after business hours, and the other one happened very late last night. The first one had 1,123 records comprising 32,000 pages, and a subsequent release had 1,059 records comprising 31,400 pages. So if you're doing the math right now, we are at 63,400 pages. And if Trump is accurate, we have no way of knowing what he means when he uses a number like 80,000. But if Trump is accurate, that means that we are still shy of the total. And I'm, God, please be shy of the total, because if you want the super brief, too long didn't read version of this, TLDR as the kids say, if you want that version of this, we're missing almost anything and everything we could have possibly wanted. Stuff we knew was there. This could end up being a sham. That's the way this feels to me right now. And I'm going to make the following argument. I'm going to suggest that there's a list of things. I will try to get into as many of them in the time that we have as possible, that we were expecting to see there, that we know exist, that should have been revealed. And by accident, if you are 3/4 of the way through with releasing the documents, at least one of these things should have shown up.
Right.
None of them have.
Okay.
None of them have. Okay.
So what are the things that we're we're anticipating and missing?
Let me save that. Was that okay? Can I?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, right?
Here's what I want to do first. I would like to give everybody a primer.
Right.
So it's a way, because ignorance is not a sin. I'm ignorant of more things than I know. Every human being is in this condition. Most people have not spent their time studying and researching this issue. So they don't know what to expect. And you're seeing stuff start to pop up in Twitter, especially. And I feel like I need to warn people about the stuff that's already come up so far and use these things as object lessons for how to understand and analyze what's coming here. I'm going to give you some quick tools that you can use. So if you only watch the first few minutes of this podcast, you're already going to be much more informed going into the void and seeing people post their nonsense. You're going to get a good sense of how to sift through that and recognize what is wheat and what is chaff. Okay. So the very first thing is that the way things come out in these is that there is a document and it's got a bunch of redactions in it. And the document gets released with the redactions. And then over time, redactions get peeled off. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. They get pulled off and you get to see a little more of the picture, but they don't all get taken off. So there are documents here that have been released 1, 2, or more times in history, but they were still valuable because of what was behind the black marker or the white tape that covered the item.
Understood.
So somebody goes to Twitter who's got Trump derangement syndrome and goes, oh, there's nothing new here. There's absolutely nothing new here. It's all the same documents that Biden released, and Trump's pretending to take credit for it. That's wrong, because what was different about those documents was that the redactions have been pulled off. And then later he's like, oh, yeah, well, a couple of them have some redactions. Well, no, they all have redactions. And the redactions have been pulled back. Now, that doesn't mean all of them have been pulled back. You asked me already what was in there. I found a document just in my sampling of about 40 of them last night that still had a redaction in it. So I don't have the link to it because I was going through them as fast as I possibly could, trying to digest what was there to see if it was of any value. But I doubt that we are getting completely unredacted files here. But you can literally pulling back or unmasking one thing constitutes new information, even if it's the same document.
Right.
And
so
usually what's being left out is a proper noun. There's
so we have to look at these
thing that's being left out.
You have to look at them side by side. Just look for black marks, right?
You would have to do that to know what you're doing. And this is why I say there's a group of people who have lived in these documents who have a skill that the rest of us don't have. They know full well when they're looking at a document, oh, we've seen this document before. They know the significance of why a certain piece of information has now been revealed.
Right.
I have to say, as a layperson, even though I paid attention to this case, the redactions that I have seen so far that have been unmasked are incredibly disappointing by and large. Oftentimes, what's going to be redacted is an individual human name, but it's not necessarily their name. It could be their code name, or it could be their position, or it could be a group. And in some cases, in one case, it just 2 cases that just kind of extraordinarily blew me away. They didn't even actually specify the exact name of the group. They just said a type of people, as in the Mexican intelligence authorities type of thing, right? Like, it's so vague. And it's like, why was this masked up till now?
Right.
It makes very little sense that that's what happened. So a lot of the stuff that was masked and that's even being unmasked this morning has a height of ridiculousness factor that is very high.
So we have more documents, even though, like, you're looking at a file. The file name could be the same as something from 20 years ago. There's just more white space in the new stuff. And a lot of the white space that is now new is like, well, why did they ever bother taking that out?
Yes. Now it's a better way to say it is that they pulled off the white space, right?
Yeah.
Now you can see what.
Yeah, now you can see. Right.
So, so I asked you to put up a crayon with a funny URL that's got a bunch of X's in it.
Yeah. Here we go.
All right, we're going to give you a specific example of this in just a moment. But every time you see somebody post something, there's 2 things that you can do as you're watching these things being posted. And this is really important because there's a whole flood of misinformation that's come out online about what is and what is not in the files, or what is and is not new information. And I want to give you a clue as to how you could go about doing this. First, ask for the file name. There's a link for every one of these things, and they're all going to be the same. So you see here, it says archives.gov/files/research/JFK/releases. I got to look around my camera here. /releases. And then you'll see the year. It's literally going to say 2025 in that spot, 2025. And then yesterday was the date that these were starting to come out. That was 03/18, so it's March 18th there. And then there is a 10-digit file number. Now, that 10-digit file number is a control number for all the PDFs that they digitize. They assign a file number to all of this. And in fact, that file number is robust enough that sometimes you can use that file number on a previous release. You can see what was redacted because those exist at the archive.gov/file/research/JFK page, right? You can see all that stuff. They've got them by years. So just last night, they put up a button that says 2025. When you go here, you're treated to a list of well over 2,000 of these kinds of links.
Oh, yeah.
And they list a handful of them per page, and you can click on them one at a time. But if you see somebody posting something online and they're not giving you one of these URLs, be suspicious. I mean, your provisional position should be they're lying to you until you have this and you can go look at the document yourself. They have no reason to hide this information. Twitter is very easy to use. The very next thing they could do, they could include it in their post, or they could put it in the first tweet below their post, right? So ask for this. When you see somebody making a claim and they don't include this, ask them for this. Challenge their credibility. I watched somebody last night or this morning, I get to read their Twitter feed, put out something that's fraudulent, and they were called on it. And then somebody was smart enough to ask this question, and they gave the link to the entire archives file. Like, go find one of these documents.
Yeah, show me. Here's the documents.
Just ask for this. This is the format, and that 10-digit, you see it's 3 digits, 5 digits, 5 digits, separated by dashes. That's a control number that you can look for these items. The other thing
want to see the good one?
Hold on just a second. The other thing is that on the top of a lot of the documents, you will see a small line, a thin line across the top that will basically say that it was just declassified, and it will have a 2025 date in it. Like there's a little bar that goes across top. I don't have a sample of one of these here to show you right now, but if somebody shows you a scan or a picture and it has that little bar across the top, the likelihood that it is in one of these files goes up, and you may even be able to make out or read the file number in that version of it as well. So don't accept any files that are not validated. Just don't. Anybody tells you anything, and especially if you see them putting highlights on stuff so that you're going to notice something special, or putting red circles around something so that you'll notice something special. If this file control number isn't there, assume they are trying to con you. Just assume it, please. Now, you said you wanted to share this. So this is one of the files that was actually interesting to me last night. Here's an example of an actual full file name, if you want to put that up there.
Yep, coming up.
And for those who are listening, once again, it's archives.gov.files/research/2025/0318, which was the date yesterday, March 18th, /177-1001/10064.pdf. And I'm sorry for those of you that watched. You didn't need to hear me read through all of that, but not everybody watched this, so some listen to it. We are on almost every podcasting platform out there. So for those that are listening or not watching, even if they're on YouTube and they're not watching, they're maybe sanding the walls or something while they're listening to us. I don't know what they're doing right now. I felt like the need to read that. That particular file was a November 23, 1963, day after the assassination file, reporting events that had occurred on the day of the assassination involving Cubans in Chile, Cuban government officials in Chile. And there was a Cuban official, according to the report, who believed this was an inside the CIA cabal and that there was about to be an invasion of Cuba. He was scared that this was so well organized that Cuba was about to be invaded. So that was one of the new revelations that was in there last night. It's not significant because it's largely somebody's opinion, a well-informed opinion, I might add, but still an opinion nonetheless. That was one of the things that, to my knowledge, now there may be experts, and my epistemic status on this is low to medium confidence on this, but to my knowledge, that was a new piece of information that came out in the files last night. I can't stand that I have to say what I'm about to say next. It makes me white hot mad. Anti-Semitism is all over the place on Twitter. One of the key figures in this story, we did learn something additional about him. He was one of the things that was unmasked last night. He's called Informant 100. His name's James Angleton. And the people who have followed this story the closest know that two things about him. They know, number one, that he was the director of counterintelligence at the CIA, and that it's very likely that Oswald's trip to Russia, where he was living in the Soviet Union for a couple of years, that he was likely a dangle, which is a counterintelligence term. They basically were trying to surface a mole by putting an agent inside the country on purpose. And when the information came back, somebody's making an inquiry about, hey, what's this guy doing over here? Because they routed all of his files, pipelined them straight to Angleton's office, basically. There was another woman agent that handled those. But it was his office where this was being handled out of. He was keeping tabs on Lee Harvey Oswald in the 50s when he was in 1960, when he was in the Soviet Union up through 1962. He was keeping tabs on him. But the other thing that Angleton did historically, and this came out largely as a result, we know a lot of this is that fact thanks to the Church Commission. He may well have been involved in helping or directly leaking nuclear missile development secrets to Israel. And what we learned in a document about Informant 100 yesterday, as I understand it, and again, I'm not keeping up on all the degrees of the tiny details of little nuances that we're learning new things and not. So I could be wrong about this, and I'm going to say that up front. But I believe what we have learned that was new about this last night was that he was appointed to be basically the direct liaison from the CIA to the FBI and all things Israel. So he had total control over what information was or was not shared with the FBI. That was entirely within his discretion, and that this was a long standing. This went on from the mid 50s, like 1954 ballpark. I can't remember the exact date. On up until nearly the end of his the 60s, that James Angleton had this level of authority and power, and at one point he was even called Informant 100 in this regard. And some of that information is what was unredacted. Now, I bring this up under the banner of anti-Semitism because the people who are pointing out that this information is new are people that were looking for any possible way that they can tie the events to Israel. And I've looked at this case for a long time, folks. The evidence, you have to practically wish this to come up. It's so tenuous and so theoretical and so incredibly circumstantial. And even at that, I'm giving it too much credit that somehow or other Israel or Mossad or something else was involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And and I think it's wrong because it misses potentially why this happened. And I've not placed as much premium on why as how personally, because I think I want to understand my government better. But if you're looking outside of our government for an excuse for what happened, and you don't have actual evidence to present, you're just operating off of your own biases and theories on this, you're part of the problem. And your hate and your ugliness, anybody you see saying, oh, it's the Jews, oh, it's whatever, please just turn them off. Please just turn them off. And if you're one of those people right now and I just offended you, I'm not going to apologize. You need to hear this. Your hatred is so blinded you that you are overlooking, an absolute huge ton of evidence about what actually did happen in this case, just to serve your own biases. And it's unacceptable to let hate drive you in this way. And I just want, there's people posting this stuff on Twitter right now, and they're taking this one document where we appear to have learned something new about James Angleton, and they're using it to in the advancement of anti-Semitic hate. So there's that.
I can't understand the motivation of anyone to not get at the truth here unless they are very short-sighted and, as you've pointed out, have an axe to grind.
Yes.
Even if it's a completely fictitious axe.
It's a fictitious axe. There's the story is just so weak. I don't want to even dignify it. I know what their story is, and it just doesn't work. It's so weak compared to so many other strains of evidence. there's 2 or 3 different cases that could be made, some of them pretty extraordinarily bizarre, that have better evidence than this one. Even the lone nut theory has better evidence than this story. This is so appallingly bad. So if you see this, if you see them blaming Israel, if you see any connection to that, just shut it down. Because I'm not telling you to do this out of ignorance. I'm telling you that I've put in the homework, and there are at least, I probably could sit here and rifle off 5 different theories of the crime that all have substantially more evidence to them than this.
Can I ask a quick question about Angleton?
Yes.
And we may not know the answer to this, but from what I've read about the CIA and the FBI and our national intelligence system at the time, 50s and 60s, it seems like it was typical to have one guy who was doing all the work. Like that one person was the source of all the stuff in whatever their domain was. So is it that far off that Angleton could have had this blanket responsibility? Or is that unique to him?
No. There's a lot of, in intelligence, there's a lot of freewheeling free agents. This is actually a really common thing. And it's one of the reasons. So my theory of the crime, which I've never described here on air, basically operates under the notion that if you build a monster, you shouldn't be surprised when it comes home. You send the monster out to do bad things elsewhere, you shouldn't be surprised when it comes back. And there's a degree to which, people have revered John F. Kennedy. A lot of the people get into this kind of study. They're like, oh, he was such a great president, such a threat to the establishment. I haven't succumbed to that, because I have kept myself cognizant the entire time of the fact that they were running assassination operations. They were trying to destabilize the government of Cuba. That he and his brother both believed in that, and they even at the end, and this may have actually contributed to how the crime ended up going down. They were looking to build a government in exile that they could plant over there. So no.
An MO, by the way, that still exists in our country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And if we have time, we're going to come back to James Angleton, because he's one of the things that should have been in there. And this is a paltry bit of evidence that we have about him.
But you wanted to make a bigger point. I sort of derailed that, but I was curious.
No, that was about the anti-Semitism in Angleton. So for now, that's the point I want to make. But some of the stuff that has been on Twitter, I'm going to give you 2 examples of stuff that is so incredibly stupid, and yet it's the most viral. What is there a rule? Somebody probably has already come up with a law that dictates that the dumbest stuff gets the most viral attention.
Oh yeah, it's called the algorithm.
Well, it may be called that. It may be called that. But I mean, I'm going to give you 2 examples. These things, you're going to see these things. I went on Twitter and I couldn't avoid them. Like trying to get around them, they still kept popping out. Okay. And they're so incredibly dumb. Okay. Allegedly, John F. Kennedy Jr. wrote an angry letter to then Senator Joe Biden saying, "You're a traitor." And Russell Brand, he comes in, he's got his shirt down, down about 8 buttons or whatever it is that he does, right? And he's sitting there with his necklace on going, "Can you believe that John F. Kennedy Jr. even thought that Joe Biden, what did he know about our future first president?" This is the stuff that's getting tweeted out there. This is blatantly irresponsible. Okay. Yes, this was in the document dump, and God only knows why any part of this was redacted up until now. It is stunning to me that this somehow or other was considered classified and the American public couldn't know about it. But there was a letter written by an unsub, which is basically the term of art that the intelligence community uses for an unknown subject, who signed themselves as John F. Kennedy Jr. And at the time, a handwriting analysis was done, and John Kennedy was talked to, and he didn't send this letter to Senator Joe Biden. So if you see this thing, this is complete and utter nonsense, and I'm kind of ticked, because I get on this morning. I wanted to see what the world had figured out about this case. I'd started looking at stuff last night. This morning, I'm hoping to see something really interesting, and I had things I knew to look for, and I get confronted with this crap. And that's all I can call it. This is crap. Okay. And the fact that Russell Brand is one of the people tweeting this out, it's crap.
It gets likes, though, man. It gets likes. That's more important than the truth.
Okay. Here's my favorite. Here's my favorite. A guy named Sergei Zornono. That's literally his name, Sergei Zornono. It's spelled, if I can see this here clearly, Czornonoh. Sergei Zornono. That seems to be the pronunciation of the word. This should have been a no-no. I do not understand why this was classified. I have a copy of the letter right here. Let me tell you what Sergei, I will give you the brief version of it. He says that in Bulgaria, in August of 1963, he basically became aware that Lee Harvey Oswald had purchased a rifle. Bill, stay on screen for this one, please. He basically becomes aware that in August of 1963, that Lee Harvey Oswald had purchased a rifle. He's in Bulgaria. This is where he gets his thing. And he's become persuaded at that time that Lee Harvey Oswald had purchased it for the purpose of assassination. And he was asked, well, who was it to assassinate? Why, wouldn't you know it? It was John F. Kennedy, the president of the United States. Well, what was going to happen to this Oswald? Well, he's going to be killed after Kennedy is. Oh, and then on top of that, I heard that Martin Luther King would also be killed. And I think it was going to be James Earl Ray who did it, who, by the way, was in prison at that time in 1963. It was going to be him. And they said, well, that's great, but this letter is actually dated, I think it's either 1977 or 78. I can't quite make out the date at the top of the page. Not 1963, not August of 19, not November of 19, not December, not before the Warren Commission produces its report in 1964, but in 1977 or 78, he's saying, I've been instructed by my superiors to share this story with you. So they ask him, why didn't you bring this story forward earlier? And he said, I believe I was given amnesia gas at the time.
Oh, this is a perfect story.
This was considered classified somehow, which is the joke number one on all of us. And most of the stuff is not as nonsensical as this, but it is nonsensical in a lot of cases. But this particular document is viral right now. Yeah. This is all over the place right now. People are talking about this. And again, I want real information and real news. I can laugh at this, but this is offensively stupid. It's so stupid, it's offensive. I don't get offended easily, but I'm offended by how stupid this is. And
Yeah, I know, Jim. I know. And here we are even, giving it fuel.
All right, let's talk about a real Soviet situation. I was very, very interested in seeing something in there that, to my knowledge, there is not a lot of information about, and that is Oswald's trip to Mexico.
Right. If it was him.
The day after JFK's assassination, the CIA identified Valery Kostikov as a KGB officer. He was tied allegedly to the Soviet spy agency's 13th Department. The 13th Department was allegedly responsible for sabotage and assassinations. What in the trade they call, this euphemism just kills me, executive actions. So the assassination of a president is an executive action.
Right.
That's the trade term.
To differentiate it from executive orders, which are a whole different thing.
A whole different thing. Thanks a lot, Phil. Now my cough's going to come back. But we got in these documents last night a 1982 letter. And again, I want to put my epistemic confidence meter out there and say it's possible that this was already revealed before, and I'm just learning of it. There's a lot of details in this case that I still don't know. These are hyper details, I should point out. But there is in the mix last night a 1982 letter from a CIA counterintelligence chief by the name of David Blee, and he contradicts this. He stated the agency had no such info and that the KGB had actually conducted executive actions, again, assassinations of leaders, since 1959. So the idea that this Kostikov, who is, by the way, an incredible character, he's a very interesting character, probably was not the assassin that he was being portrayed to be in the weekend of 1963 when the assassination occurred.
Right. The
Now,
Friday
his
after.
importance to this story is he's one of the people at the Soviet embassy who allegedly meets with A. Lee Harvey Oswald. And I say A. Lee Harvey Oswald because all of the evidence, particularly that evidence that was unearthed by the Assassination Records Review Board in the late 70s, the House Assassinations Committee.
Yes.
In the late 70s. They are confident. The people that worked on that staff are confident that the Oswald that was down in Mexico City was an imposter. It was not him. And there's all kinds of reasons to believe this. My friend Perry Willis is working on a piece about this, and I am actually researching this issue now because I'm increasingly believing this is more and more and more important. And it was a lot of what, based on what happened in the dynamics and the politics between the people working for the committee and some members of Congress who were tightly tied with the CIA. The CIA was trying to do everything they could to keep Mexico City from becoming the truth about Mexico City from surfacing and becoming an issue.
Right, which then it wasn't Oswald.
It wasn't Oswald. I'll just give you one. There are 40 different little details easily that we could cover, but I'll just give you one that I think is the most sensational. So they had cameras on all the doors going in and out of the Cuban embassy and consulate. And they had set up a device. In 1963, they already had a device that was able to act on motion. It was a motion sensor that would then create a mechanical effect. And the mechanical effect was to drop a hammer. So you could drop a hammer to press the button on a camera. So they didn't have quite enough staff to cover all the doors at the same time. So they had set up on one of the doors, they had set up a camera, and they had designed it so it could click pictures, right? As soon as it saw human motion or whatever, it could do it. Now, that camera was tested the day before Oswald allegedly went to the embassy, and magically, not only does that camera not have any photos, it malfunctioned that day, despite being tested the day before. Not only did it malfunction, but we have no photos of Lee Harvey Oswald going in and out of the Mexican embassy. And you say, oh, but wait a minute, Jim, we do. We do have a photo. But what it is a photo of a man that they know full well, and you would too if you saw him. I could put him up on the screen now. You would know that that's not Lee Harvey Oswald. It's a big, burly, 6-foot guy. It's not the tiny, in comparison, 5'9", 145-pound Lee Harvey Oswald with the receding hairline. It's a different guy. You can see this as clear as day. Okay. I mean, maybe somebody in another race looks and says, y'all look the same, but we can all see it. We can all tell. And that's the only photo that they have. And they haven't produced the other photos or the identity of that person. So magically, even though they had trained that thing to take the pictures and they had just tested it the day before, it didn't work.
Yeah, on the most important day of its life.
And so there's a lot of problems, just a huge ton of problems with that story. And it really does look like it was the beginning of the actual sheep dipping. You could argue that some of that sheep dipping was happening in New Orleans, but they were basically beginning to create their patsy at that juncture. And that is the opinion, by the way, the professional opinion of a prosecutor who wrote the most significant report that was classified until the Assassination Records Review Board was able to reveal it, the Lopez report. Okay?
Yeah, I got
Here's another story that's going viral. Gary Underhill. Gary Underhill. And everybody's pretending like this is like some sensational story. So let me give you the highlights of the story, and then let me tell you the truth about it. The day after the assassination, Gary Underhill leaves Washington in a hurry, and he shows up late in the evening at a friend's house in New Jersey. Her name was Charlene. And he tells her, Charlene Fitzsimmons, that a small clique within the CIA was responsible for the assassination, and he was afraid for his life and confided that he probably had to leave the country. Now, less than 6 months later, May 8th, 1964, Underhill was found in his Washington apartment in his bed with a gunshot wound to the head.
Was the gun still there? I mean, this is one of those dumb things.
The coroner ruled it a suicide.
It was suicide. Okay.
That's what they ruled it. It's in his left side. There's an argument that he was actually right-handed. So it's behind his ear on the left side in his bed. Before his death, Underhill had insisted to people privately that Lee Harvey Oswald had been framed. He had said things like, quote, Oswald is a patsy. They set him up. It's too much. The blank people without mothers is the term he used, have done something outrageous. They've killed the president. I've been listening and hearing things. I couldn't believe they got away with it, but they did. I know who they are, he went on to say. That's the problem. I know, and they know. That's why I'm here. I cannot stay in New York. Okay, so he dies in May of 1964, regardless of how he died. Now, here's why this is just fascinating to me. Okay, Gary Underhill's Wikipedia page was updated yesterday. There is a teeny tiny bit of new information in this story. But that Wikipedia page has been around since at least January of 2012. You say, oh, okay. So it's not a new story. There's this attempt. Tim Pool, for example, is like, hey, what's going on here? Like, because these people are new to the story. Is this guy important somehow? And I'll be honest with you, he's not a character I was super familiar with before yesterday either. I had not done any additional research into him. His name had gone by in passing. But his tale actually goes back to the Jim Garrison era. Now, if you don't know who Jim Garrison is, that's who Kevin Costner is playing. He was actually the New Orleans district attorney who took a case in 1969 or 70 against a New Orleans businessman, saying that he was involved in the Kennedy assassination. He was part of the conspiracy.
Yeah.
Jim Garrison was aware of Gary Underhill and his story. Gerald Posner comes along in 1993, our friend Gerald, which we did an episode about earlier. We'll put that in the show notes. He's one of the lone nutters. He is actually the lone nutter in chief right now. He is the current carrier of the mantle. His book, Case Closed, talks about this and says there's no evidence that Underhill was actually affiliated with the CIA or in the CIA. But he was. And Jim DiEugenio ended up writing a review explaining that. And at the same time, Jim DiEugenio covered this story in Destiny Betrayed, also published in 1993. And Destiny Betrayed is later made into a 4-part documentary series released just a few years ago by Oliver Stone. Jim DiEugenio is Oliver Stone's expert. Helped him write his script and put together the entire show.
Yeah, that's JFK, right?
This is, yeah.
Oh, no.
This is... Well, no,
JFK is the movie. This is a series.
This was a series that you can get on like Amazon and elsewhere. I own it. It's worth watching. There's 4 parts to it. It's completely worth watching. It's one of the things we recommended in the podcast episode where we covered some of the sources where you might get really good information on this story. If you wanted to start to research it yourself and you wanted to get up to speed, it was one of the top things on the list in terms of what you should or shouldn't consume to get up to speed quickly. But here's the best part of all this. Not only is this story not new, and we only got a tiny sliver of new information about it yesterday, but I want to show you how the government classification system works. There was a publication in the 60s, during the radical 60s, the crazy 60s and early 70s, where people were blowing stuff up from the left, right? They were like blowing up buildings and breaking into FBI offices and burning down draft centers and so on and so forth. Black Panthers and the whole 9 yards. There is a left-wing publication put up by Michael Collier and David Horowitz. David Horowitz has since converted to the conservative side, but it was called Ramparts. That was the name of the publication. And what is being declassified is a 1967 Rampart story. So what happened was this got published, but it got published in Ramparts, and not everybody reads Ramparts, and then it got classified so that it couldn't be republished. And it got basically suppressed and cut off, and that's the end of the story. You can't, unless you had an original copy of the 1967 piece, you weren't going to see this. You couldn't publish it online, for example. And that's what got revealed here, was that under classification was a 1967 Rampart story telling about Gary Underhill and his fleeing from New York to go see Charlene Fitzsimmons and tell her and some other friends that he crossed, that felt his life was in danger because he recognized that this was a inside CIA plot. That is what they chose to classify, a 1967 Rampart story. Now, we have theorized on this show that they could have been involved. Hundreds of other people have done so in books and articles and podcasts. This has been done again and again. What is so special about a 1967 Rampart story that our government needs to classify it? So when you see this story go by, because it's too long. You didn't read all 80,000 pages last night. I didn't either. There's the truth of that story.
So this is, I mean, I'm just listening to you tell this story right now, and it feels like that 1967, newsletter, mimeographed, whatever, however they distributed it, was so close to the truth that it needed to be suppressed.
You said it, not me.
Yeah, that's how I hear that.
Yeah, and I don't think that's an unreasonable take. I don't think there's any evidence to back that up. But if that's what you're assuming, why would they classify it?
Yeah, why else would they classify it?
I understand exactly why you say that. All right.
Does this put David Horowitz in a bad place? I'm being rhetorical, but we don't have to uncover that.
No, I David's very old at this point. I knew him many decades ago. I actually knew him for a short time. He's pretty old right now, and Michael Collier, I believe, is dead. I'm not positive about that. So, and both of them became conservatives. They switched sides. They basically said they were on the wrong side of history, and made a new career out of that. And they did it long before there was anybody named Trump. They were doing this in the 80s. Okay, so I want to go back to your original question.
Yeah.
What wasn't included?
What wasn't?
Okay, I am irritated. Once again. The friend that I spoke to this morning about this says to me, give them a little bit more time. There were 2 waves that came out last night. I don't know whether we can, when Donald Trump says 80,000 pages, what that means. Because Donald Trump has a history of exaggerating. Donald Trump has a history of saying things that are not completely true. He does some of this on purpose as part of an ongoing thing that he does, that he knows how to manipulate the media and his opposition into attacking him and using that to get stronger. Is it really 80,000 pages? He's prone to exaggerate. It could be 79,000, could be 75,000, could be 70,000. I have a hard time believing it's more than 80,000, but it's even possible that that's the case. We don't actually know at this juncture what the cap is. And as I'm sitting here recording this with you, once again, what we know is that there are 63,400 pages that have been released. Okay? In basically two waves so far. So I'm hoping there's more. I'm going to tell you why. Because everything that I was hoping to learn and see in this data release, everything was not included. I cannot point to a single thing, and I'm going to give you a list here. We're going to go through it as quick as we possibly can. Every single thing I was looking for was not there. And let's just assume, for the sake of the math, that it's 80,000 and we just got just over 60,000. And to keep the numbers nice and round, that means we've gotten 75% approximately of the documents.
Of everything there is.
On accident, we should have had at least one of the things I'm going to read off to you here in a moment. On accident, we should have had that stuff. It should have just slipped through. We know some things about how they were handling this data at the very end. The administration was caught off guard when Donald Trump on Tuesday was walking into the non-ironically named Kennedy Center and saying, hey, I'm at the Kennedy Center. And by the way, we're going to release the documents on Tuesday. This is Monday, he says this. We're going to release the documents on Tuesday. There's 80,000 of them. And when he said 80,000, the people in the community all started looking at each other and said, 80,000, where did he get that number from? Nobody knew where he got that number from. That was much higher than what we understood the number to be. And so, okay, well, maybe this is going to be extra exciting. Maybe we're going to get even more stuff than we thought we were going to get. This was really huge. Okay. So we held our breath and waited. It turns out, we now know this, the reason they couldn't get this stuff out until after the close of business yesterday was because on Tuesday night, I didn't say yesterday, that was Wednesday. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, the morning after this stuff was released. It turns out to be precise, on Tuesday night, the Justice Department pulled lawyers off of a variety of cases. They had everybody stay at the office late. They did as much as they could to go back through these files one more time.
Yeah.
because they were still scared that something was going to slip out. On a 62-year-old case, on a 62-year-old case, where all of the enemies and all of the axes to grind and basically nearly all the people, I'm going to give you a big glaring exception in a moment, are dead. And they're sitting there saying, well, we got to go through this one more time. And it's irritating to me. And then they're saying now that, well, we haven't gotten them all up because we're scanning them as fast as they could. Really? You're just running them through the scanner now?
Just now? Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me either. So this is what they did. Now, I watched Mark Gruber, America's Untold Stories. I know the thing that he was most looking for, I was looking for it too, was information on Mexico City. And Mexico City, as I just described a few minutes ago, was a big part of the plot, perhaps the cover-up that was happening. We've talked about George Joannides, who I'm going to bring up in a minute. The attempts to try to keep CIA information from getting into the hands of that committee. It seems that one of the pieces of information that they were the absolutely most sensitive about was what happened, what their role is, what they knew and didn't know, and when they knew and didn't know in Mexico City as to what was happening. I can tell you that their story was already being broken that weekend in a phone call from J. Edgar Hoover to then head of the FBI to the new president, Lyndon Johnson. He was already busting that story. It was that bad. And it turns out it's probably an entire farce. And it's a huge part of Gerald Posner's case. It's a huge part of the Warren Commission case. And there's one character in particular I want to know about because she did give some very compelling testimony, but we have significant evidence or reason to believe she was actually tortured by the Mexican authorities to get this evidence. She was a secretary working in the Cuban consulate. Her name's Sylvia Durante. There's no information that I'm aware of yet about Mexico City and zero information so far about Sylvia Durante. Jefferson Morley came up with a way to test whether or not this document release, it was going to be real. He set up a test. He made a list of 15 documents that met these 3 tests. These records are known to exist. We're not fishing for them. We're not speculating. They are known to exist. Let me repeat that. This is not speculation. Known to exist documents. 2, known to be in possession of the government and can be retrieved easily. So there's a low bar here. Okay. And 3, have never been seen in their entirety by the public, which is a violation of the JFK Records Act. All of this stuff should have been out in 2017. So the people who are saying, Jim, be patient, more's coming, we should have had all of this in 2017. I have been patient. Okay. And by accident, one of these things should have shown up in the document released last night. I'm going to go through these. I'm going to go through these in as rapid fire fashion as possible, Bill. The George Joannides file. George Joannides was a Miami-based undercover officer. He was working with a group of anti-Castro youth who interacted with none other than Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. They were a CIA front. They were being funded. And he came out of retirement to be the CIA liaison to make sure that information, including his real identity and role in the case, did not make it to the House Assassinations Committee in 1978. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., number 2, wrote a memo arguing that the CIA should be visibly reorganized. We know exactly, we have the riff on this. We know exactly where that file's at, and yet we cannot get that file. It was not released last night. We discussed James Angleton earlier. There's a 113-page transcript of his interview that was done involving his Oswald's private life and political activities 4 years before JFK was killed. We know exactly where that is too. We know that he was surveilling. We did not get that. CIA had a 77-page summary, heavily redacted, of its surveillance operations in Mexico City at the time. We did not get that. The AM World, this is one of the code names that they use, the AM World operations. These are the operational and travel records for the following CIA officers: Emilio Rodriguez, Anthony Sforza, and David Atlee Phillips, whom we've discussed on this show before. What did these operatives know during the summer and fall of 1963? The AM World files would likely tell us that was not shared. Number 6, the paramilitary name and phone list. This is the redacted roster of top secret CIA paramilitary agents operating in New Orleans area in the summer of 1963. Number 7, the Miami JFK investigation. This is what's called a SITREPS, situation reports submitted by CIA officers in southern Florida who were ordered to question their anti-Castro sources about possible Cuban involvement in JFK's murder. What a lot of people don't know is that there were agents who believed early on that there was CIA involvement in this murder, and they were actively investigating that. That was quickly suppressed. The Bill Harvey travel records. William K. Harvey, we don't have he's involved in executive actions, mind you, and we don't have his travel records. And by the way, he was a known Kennedy hater. The CIA file of Hermando Diaz Garcia. He is a Cuban assassin, and we don't have his personality file. There are people who believe that he may have been one of the gunmen in Dallas. The original Nix film. Now, the Nix film was recently, there was some settlement in court between the government and the Nix grandchildren finally, but this is the opposite side view of the Zapruder.
Yeah.
Yep. And the original was taken and never returned. The JFK whistleblower report. This is the CIA Inspector General 40 to 50 page report. People are wondering if there was an intent to deceive the Congress as a JFK whistleblower told facts in October of 24. The Carlos Marcello file and the Carlos Marcello tapes. He was the head of the New Orleans mob, which had influence over the Dallas area that was part of their territory at the time. He was being tried at that hour. Did he have a role? Does he have connection to some of the players, including Jack Ruby? Infiltration of the Miami media. There are redacted info on the influence that the CIA was directly having over Miami newspapers. We didn't get that either. And there are 2 interviews, 5 very personal letters to Mrs. Kennedy from President Lyndon Johnson, 4 transcripts of interviews conducted by author William Manchester of Jackie, and 2 transcripts of interviews by Robert Kennedy, the first in May of 64 and the second of January of 65. We have reason to believe that she did not believe the official story of the lone gunman, and that she may have even discussed this with LBJ, and we don't have that record either. So those are the lists. Morley said these are the scorecard to look for. On top of the Joannides file, on top of my interest in Sylvia Duarte, I was interested in Lee Harvey Oswald's tax returns. They have been classified. It appears from the language on the page of the archive that they are not going to ever give us the tax returns. Now you say, Jim, wait a minute. I told this to someone here and they were dumbfounded. Like they were like, holy cow, there's still tax records, IRS records of Lee Harvey Oswald in the 50s and 60s. And the answer is yes, there are. And so, that's sensational all by itself, but they might show us whether or not he was a confidential informant or on the payroll of any intelligence agency or receiving any support. Bureaucrats, if they do nothing else, make sure they fill out and take care of paper, right? They check the boxes and make sure they're not going to be accused of stealing the money. So they're not sneaking the money to Oswald somehow. The money's there. It shows up on his tax return. They are that efficient, but they've classified those documents along with, and this is the part that roasts me the most. This is where I want to finish. I want to know Ruth Paine's story. There's tax records of hers that are also classified. There's other documents we don't know. Unlike Jefferson Morley, I can't prove that these other documents exist. But Ruth Paine is the living person who's still alive to tell secrets and could. And Ruth Paine has steadfastly refused to do so. You say, who is Ruth Paine? At some point, we may do an episode just on Ruth Paine alone because I think her story is that important.
You've met her, right? You've been to her house?
No, I've been to her house. I was at the house so she housed Marina Oswald and her 2 daughters. And it's the place that Lee would visit on the weekends in the weeks leading up to the tragic event. And we know an awful lot about Lee Harvey Oswald because of her. There's evidence that she produced even after 2 government searches of her house. 2 different government agencies came in and searched her house top to bottom, and she still kept producing evidence for weeks after. Very conveniently, she would produce another piece of evidence and another piece of evidence. The whole tale of whether or not Lee is involved in the Walker shooting, whether he took a shot at General Walker in his home and grazed him in April of 1963. The only reason that there is any tie to Lee, the beginning of that entire chain of events, happens because of a letter that she finds that allegedly basically has him confessing, and that was in her handwriting because she transcribed it for him.
Of course.
It's fascinating, the little things that just keep leaking out of her house. She kept finding new things when she needed to. She had an unusually quick and rapid engagement with the Oswald family in April of 1963. She drives Marina to New Orleans when they move there. She goes and picks up Marina and the kids on the way back. She is connected to the CIA. She denied this for most of her life. However, now it's been declassified. Her sister was actually a consultant for the CIA, and her father actually worked for an agency. I don't know. It's got a familiar name. USAID?
Yeah, it could be USAID.
Yeah, that USC. So he's a banking consultant kind of guy. And he's working down in South America. And she stays that summer. She spends time on the Forbes family because that's her husband Michael's family. They're very, very rich, the Forbes family. They go all the way back to the Paines and the Forbes go all the way back to the Mayflower. They kicked the rock that settled the country, right? And so this is old money, and they own an island in New York. They own an entire island. It's called Naushon Island. And the director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, has a girlfriend who's close friends with the Forbes, and she vacations there the same summer that Ruth also vacations at Naushon Island. And when Ruth goes and testifies before the Warren Commission and offers more testimony than any other person other than Marina herself. Her testimony is the longest testimony in the Warren Commission records. When she offers that testimony, Alan Dulles never reveals to the room that he knows her, and she never reveals back. They get into everybody else's Picayune connections of any kind, anything, at anyone, at any time, but that detail is left out completely. It does not get discussed at the Warren Commission because that was part of how the cover-up was supposed to run. I am persuaded. I'm not going to get into my theory of Ruth today. There's a whole list of things. I can go through 14, 20 of them right now with no problem. In fact, I think the list at this point may even top 30 things that are really, really, and I've only covered a couple of them right now, that are really kind of funny coincidences about Ruth. And she's still alive. She's in her 90s. She's still alive. And one of the things that has been done throughout this case is that when people are alive, their information has been protected. They've been protected by having their information hidden from the public.
Sure, right.
But after 62 years and her being in her 90s, this is a disservice at this point. She's one of the last people. She may even be the very last person who can tell us the truth of what happened. And I suspect she knows a lot more than she has indicated. She keeps people at bay. If you do not say that it is a lone nut and that you believe Lee Harvey Oswald did it, she will not have a conversation with you. Now, you mentioned, did I know her? Funny story. I am in Dallas, Texas on the 60th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. So I did, like hundreds of other people did that were in the area that day. I went down to Dealey Plaza to be there when they had the moment of silence at 12:30 p.m. to memorialize the exact moment 60 years before to the day that the assassination had occurred there in front of the Texas School Book Depository. And there were a lot of people there. It was a big crowd. And I walked around. My daughter and I primarily were walking around, and I shot some pictures and I listened to a couple of the people do their talks. But then we ventured off because I wanted to get to some of the other things that were going on that day as well. And we wanted to get to the Texas Theater, for example, before the arrest time had occurred. And we wanted to go see the really awful movie that Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly snuck into. And it's one of the worst movies of all time. And so we went to kind of watch that. And so I left. And then I found out that in that very same crowd, as an observer, not drawing any attention to herself, was none other than Ruth Paine. Ruth Paine does not believe there's a conspiracy. And this was a conspiracy crowd, let me tell you. Okay? And all the speakers that were getting up before the moment of silence, conspiracy speakers to a T. Some of them don't even like each other because they have different theories. But that's all that was speaking up there. There was no lone nut advocates addressing the crowd.
Yeah.
She was there to take in the speeches and to take in the event. She was there in the same crowd that I was in. And I find that fascinating. I am persuaded to the core of my being that she is still important, that she may have been part of the reason so many of these documents have been held back so long. And I wanted to hear her story. And Bill, she's not in any of the documents that's been released so far. And I'm starting to feel hornswoggled. I'm starting to feel gypped. Now, that's my too long didn't read version of events. The amount of time we've spent together is far less than it'll take you to try to read 60 or 80,000 pages, and you shouldn't, by the way. But now you know how to look and read those media reports that are coming out, and you have a provisional list of things that you should be looking for. And if you find any of these things, please alert me, because this is a crowdsourced kind of thing. If you stumble across it, I want to know. Contact us at using one of the email addresses at the zeroaggressionproject.org website. The same one we've kept giving out every time we have suggested that you can acquire a mug. If you're interested in a mug, you can send us an email there saying mug me, and you can get one of these Gracearchy mugs that I'm holding up into the camera now. Bill's got his as well. You can get one of these if you want that as well. But if you are aware, and if you feel that I've not been clear on something, you could also email us there. I'm fine with this. This story has taken up a lot of my time the last couple of years. I'm very, very interested in knowing what happened. But I have to say, my initial take on this data dump is disappointment.
So we promised you to stay tuned at the end because there's more. And as we were recording, literally as we were recording, documents were dropping. And I'm going to bring Jim back to just review what they are. We'll probably get into each of them in depth in a subsequent interview. What's up, Jim?
Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s memo, the remaining page and a half, revealing a critique of the CIA, has now been revealed. James Angleton's testimony, the sections of the longtime counterintelligence chief's closed-door meeting with the Senate in 1975, including his work with Israeli intelligence, and arrangements between himself and CIA assassination chief Bill Harvey are released. The CIA Ops Project we mentioned, a heavily redacted 77-page summary of CIA surveillance operations that later monitored Oswald in his visit to Mexico City. I'm very eager to get into this. If I didn't have work to do right now, I would be in this document. Number 4, the paramilitary name and phone list of top secret CIA paramilitary agents and Cuban group surrogates. And finally, the infiltration of Miami media, a CIA memo that talked about how they were influencing Miami newspapers. These were 5 of the 15 items that were on the Morley list that we just covered just moments ago when we were recording. In fact, I'm already changed. I'm already out of the studio and on with my day, but I came racing back in here. Thanks, Bill, so that we could get you this updated information. So this is good news. Some information has finally trickled out that's of extreme value, but I still maintain that the thing I want to see the most is more Ruth Paine stuff.
Stay tuned, everyone. We'll bring it to you right here on Gracearchy, sponsored by the Zero Aggression Project, by the way. Zap the state, and have a nice day.